And this idea that they get straight to, they've forgotten the swords and now they're just rolling around the floor, I think would be fairly accurate of the way some of these duels might have played out. Having liked the barefootedness, not a fan of the bare-toppedness. Oh no, guess who Henry's found? The hero of Agincourt. No, he's dead. What will England do? Hello, I'm Matt Lewis and I'm here today to take a deep dive into 2019's movie, The King, with Timothée Chalamet. This is a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry V. So a reimagination of something that isn't historically accurate entirely. Anyway, it's had some criticisms, it's had plenty of love. I quite like it, but I have problems with it. Let's pick it apart. Let's take a deep dive into The King. It would be quite nice if they gave you some hint who this is or what's going on. We will find out in a moment that this is Henry Hotspur Percy. And they don't ever explain in this film either why he's called Henry Hotspur Percy. It's a nickname that was given to him at the time, and it's believed to derive from the fact that he was always so keen to rush headlong into battle. So he had hot spurs, he would be digging them into his horse to drive his horse into battle. He was always keen for a fight. He was a knight with the hot spurs, Henry Hotspur. So this is kind of setting the scene for the idea that the Percys are protecting the north of England for the kings.
You're crawling in the wrong direction. That wind you feel is coming from England. Scotland's that way.
My lords, I'm most sorry for making you wait. I know you've travelled far from great travail. Pray that you will know that this time of civil unrest consumes me day and night.
We've got the arrival of Henry IV, so a man who has stolen the throne from his cousin Richard II a few years earlier. And he's presented here as in really bad health. This comes later in Henry IV's life, maybe. When he takes the throne, he's actually a famous crusading warrior, and everybody thinks he's going to be a fantastic king.
Guards, any prisoners of note taken?
Many.
Are they in trade?
No.
And why is that?
Why will you not pay Cousin Mortimer's ransom?
True story. So Mortimer is a member of the Mortimer family. The Mortimer family were considered heirs to Richard II, so rivals to Henry IV. And when Edmund Mortimer gets captured fighting in Wales, Henry IV refuses to pay his ransom. And there is a strong sense that this is Henry allowing a potential rival to be negated. But the Mortimers are in-laws. They're related by marriage to the Percy family. So the Percy family are trying to use their influence to protect the Mortimer members of their family, and finding out that Henry IV is not playing ball. He's not giving them what they want. He won't pay Cousin Mortimer's ransom.
I rather believe Mortimer a traitor. He has joined the Welsh rebels. He has betrayed England and is now an enemy of mine and therefore of yours.
All that we've done for you, we have done for the good of England. But our lands are now more riven with war than ever before. The Scots aren't finished. The Welsh have only just begun. And for what? Why do you think this might be, old man?
In reality, Hotspur is a couple of years older than Henry IV.
You're right, young Percy. I owe you much. I owe your family still more. But if the Scottish traitors you've taken prisoner are not brought to me as speedily as they might travel, I will hang you by your fucking neck.
Well, that's simply not good politics, because why are they going to continue to follow him if he's denying them any reward for following him? But what we're seeing in Hotspur is how not to go about trying to get what you want from a king. This is our first look at the future Henry V, who is called by Shakespeare Prince Hal. They're calling him Hal here, and I guess that's a way to identify him in his wayward, errant youth. He's young Hal, he's not quite Henry yet. And also, it's a way of dealing with the fact that there's lots of Henrys around. So his dad's called Henry. And so clearly Henry is in bed, spread across the bed, I'm going to say recovering from one of his many hangovers of his youth, the youth that Shakespeare gives him at least, and being woken up reasonably gently by Falstaff, who is another character that appears in lots and lots of Shakespeare plays around this period. He's normally a bit of a comedy relief character. He's not quite the same level of comedy in this film, I don't think, but he's an interesting foil to Henry. He's the old soldier around the young, inexperienced prince who doesn't know anything.
Falstaff has injured himself.
Yeah, see?
How did you get inside?
The door was ajar.
It was not.
Yes, it was. It was ajar.
It was not ajar.
Well, how else might we gain entry? Are you accusing me of having cut myself a secret key?
Yes.
And Falstaff is loosely based on a man named Sir John Fastolf, who really did exist, who was active in the 100 Years' War, who has a fantastic story all of his own. He gets accused of cowardice and stripped of his position as a member of the Garter. They have a big inquiry that ends up getting him reinstated. He gets incredibly rich from the 100 Years' War and builds Caister Castle and lives to a ripe old age. And it's believed that Shakespeare was going to base his comedic character on somebody else, but that somebody else had descendants who were still alive in Shakespeare's time who sort of objected to the idea of their ancestor being ridiculed in this way. Fastolf is an active soldier in the 100 Years' War. There's not really any sense that he's this kind of wingman buddy to Henry in any way, shape or form. So again, Shakespeare is kind of inventing that relationship. The idea that Henry was this wayward party animal in his youth comes almost exclusively from Shakespeare. There isn't really much source material to back up this idea that Henry behaved this way as a young man.
The time has come for us to consider the issue of my succession. You will not be king. You will not inherit this crown.
Nor have I sought it.
The tension is real. Quite how it's played out here is not really what happens. We don't have this idea of Henry being disinherited by his father at any point. What happens in reality is that Henry IV, as his health fails, he has moments where he's not capable of running the government, and at those times Hal steps in, which again pitches against this idea of the playboy prince who's not interested in anything.
That privilege and responsibility will instead fall to your brother Thomas. He is soft, but he is eager. He will lead my army against the newly treasonous Harry Percy. I will assume that this news comes as neither surprise nor disappointment. But it is my duty as king and father to say it to you directly.
Okay, so Thomas is making an appearance here. He is Hal's next brother. He has two more brothers. He has a John and a Humphrey too, who don't show up in this film, but both of whom are fascinating figures. Thomas was never positioned as the heir to Henry IV's throne, and that maybe plays into the idea of Henry IV having ruled over what would become a really divided and riven kingdom. You know, Henry's entire reign was a period of rebellion against his seizure of the throne from Richard II. What we see is a Henry sitting on his throne, putting people on sides against each other and setting them up to fight. Do you know what? I quite like the armour. The camp looks good, tent, realistic, people roaming around. I'm sure someone will correct me, but I actually think they've had a really good crack at some accurate armour here. We'll see what it looks like when more people arrive.
Why are you here?
I will not allow this havoc to transpire. I've come to see it stopped. Go to the rebel camp and deliver the following message to Percy Hotspur. Tell him that Prince Henry challenges him to settle today's score man on man, he and I. We will fight in our army's places.
Yes, my lord.
The idea that Henry issued this challenge to Hotspur isn't correct. Again, Hotspur is in his late 30s by this point. Henry is a 16-year-old boy. We don't have a record of him issuing this kind of duel, but there is something in this idea of a duel between two men, because the Catholic Church taught that it was a sin to shed other Christian blood. Oh, there you go. Little kick of the Hotspurs there.
Where's Henry? Come to fight him in our army's stead.
Okay, two things here. One good, one bad. I really like that they've gone with helmets on, visors down. This tendency in films to want to see the face of the actor sometimes does my head in, because it implies that people would willingly fight without any head protection. I wish they would do this more often in films and trust that the audience can understand what they're watching and what they're looking at. My criticism would be going with two swords to fight each other. So a knight fighting against ordinary people might use his sword to cut them down if they're poorly armoured. Swords won't do anything against plate armour like these people are wearing. And this idea that they get straight to, they've forgotten the swords and now they're just rolling around the floor, I think would be fairly accurate of the way some of these duels might have played out. Okay, so Henry raising his visor there just makes me want to talk about the real Battle of Shrewsbury. So 1403, Henry IV's army, with Prince Hal amongst them, take on the Percy army. There is no duel like this. There is armed conflict. There is a big battle. Prince Hal, who is 16 years old, is actually struck in the face by an arrow, and he then has to be treated, and it takes them several days. A doctor named John Bradshaw devises this special device for removing the arrowhead from his face. So Henry comes out of this with a huge scar on the side of his face. It's believed to be the reason that the only portrait we have of him as king is in profile. So you only see the side of his face that he wants you to see. You don't see the side with the big scar on it. And this was a really big, serious, important battle and a major win for Henry IV in trying to enforce his rule fairly early on in his kingship.
What business?
It is a matter of great urgency. Please, my lord, it is your father. He's dying.
Why do you say this to me? Speak to Thomas. Is he not to be your new king?
I'm afraid that is not possible. Your brother was killed in Wales.
But obviously they want to make Henry V king, because Henry V becomes king, and otherwise this wouldn't be the film that it is. So they kind of need to get rid of Thomas, and they just have him randomly off screen. You know, he's died, and Hal didn't even know his brother was dead. But that doesn't happen. So Thomas, we know, Henry's younger brother, along with their other two brothers, would serve in France, and Thomas would die just before Henry dies in France, serving his brother and fighting battles on his behalf.
You must be king. Please. You must be king.
You shall suffer the indignity of serving me. Now you'll be watched over by an altogether different king.
I'm going to be a dreadful king, and it's going to be horrible for you guys. The end of Henry IV's reign can be seen as a real demarcation. So his rule as a usurper was troubled by rebellion, And what Henry V does when he becomes king is he almost immediately sets about working out how to tackle that in a way that his father never, ever had. And actually, flashing ahead, the war with France, I think Henry identifies as a really good way to bring the nation together and to deal with the problems that England has by unifying everybody behind a foreign war. It's kind of the trick that he plays on the English polity to bring them all into line. Things are going to change now, and those who think they've had it easy under Henry IV are going to find things very difficult under Henry V. Okay, so I like the barefooted walking on cloth of a coronation. This fits with the medieval coronation procession. Kings would go from the Tower of London to Westminster Hall, and they would then process from Westminster Hall barefoot on cloth into Westminster Abbey for their coronation. This was a really big public display of the new monarch. This was everyone's chance to see the new king and to watch them undergoing this most solemn of ceremonies. So I like they've gone barefoot walking on cloth here. We're having the anointing. This is the single most sacred point of the coronation, and this is always done behind screens. So if we think about the coronation of Charles III, then this was the bit that was not televised. They went behind screens and the cameras weren't allowed to show this. Having liked the barefootedness, not a fan of the bare-toppedness. Lots of the coronation services that we have talk about the king being stripped to the waist, but they don't necessarily mean completely bare like this, because they will also talk about the shirt that the king wears, so he's left in his undershirt. In the coronation of Richard I, they talk about that shirt being ripped in the places that he is going to be anointed with oil, and later on they clearly decide this is a little bit off, ripping the king's clothes during a coronation. So they develop shirts that are laced. They have slits that are laced up in all of the places that he's going to be anointed, and so those are undone and the spots to be anointed are exposed, and then they're covered back up afterwards. So we wouldn't necessarily have this idea of the king being topless for his coronation.
All hail King Henry!
Big news, new haircut. This looks an awful lot more like the military haircut that we do associate with Henry V. It's kind of the one he has in his portrait, and the common soldier's haircut for this period. So he is the establishment and he is serious about it.
King Wenceslaus of Bohemia presents this gift to King Henry of England, to long and good health.
So in the medieval times, up until the 19th century actually, there was a huge feast after the coronation. It was done away with by William IV, who decided it was far too expensive and far too lavish an event.
For the Dauphin, son of His Majesty Charles, King of France.
A ball.
England and France aren't actively at war at the beginning of Henry's reign, but I think we can position it as a tense peace. I don't actually know whether the Dauphin specifically sent Henry V a gift, but this is 10 years after the Battle of Shrewsbury took place. He's now in his mid-20s. He's a grown man. It would be a bit of an odd jibe for the heir to the French throne to be calling him a small boy who needs a ball or a toy to play with.
The ball is an insult to you and to your kingdom. You must respond.
So William Gascoigne is Chief Justice during the reign of Henry IV. He keeps that role at the beginning of Henry V's reign.
I appreciate your umbrage, William, but my strength does not lie in me flapping up and down at the slightest barb.
Interestingly, the film is still giving us this Henry who is really reluctant. I think Henry comes to the throne with an almost immediate plan that war with France is the way he solves the problems in England. I don't think he needs any convincing of this. And in fact, the real Henry would have seized upon any excuse.
Well, he's question the so-called French king's claim to the throne upon which he sits.
Is that so?
Manager, simply aim to bolster your claim to France, should the need to meet her with force soon arise.
And you believe that need will indeed soon arise?
You wish to be a king for the people. And we must ensure to that end, however, you do not remain oblivious to the mood of the people.
What mood is this?
That France is taunting us.
It's interesting to see which one of the buttons it is that is going to lead Henry to actually engage in what we know he will do. So he's been personally insulted. His people have been insulted. He's sitting on a better legal claim, perhaps. What will it take for Henry to go to war? Well, in real life, nothing. He wants to do it.
Qui êtes-vous? J'ai été envoyé par le roi de France pour vous assassiner.
What about this physical threat to his person? Will that be enough to lure him into war?
But to ignore such an audacious act of aggression will be seen as weakness. If France's animus towards you runs deep enough for them to send an assassin, it will be felt in the street, ours and theirs. It will be known.
So this idea that an assassin has come for Henry is an interesting one, and it plays into a real event that's known as the Southampton plot. The plot was to assassinate Henry and all of his brothers, and Edmund Mortimer was to be placed on the throne. Now, what this film has done has turned the Southampton plot into a French assassination scheme against Henry. And again, it's giving us another button that's being pressed to try and drive Henry towards war, which is historically inaccurate. But in terms of the film, it's interesting to see which one of the buttons it is that is going to lead Henry to actually engage in what we know he will do. So he's been personally insulted. His people have been insulted. He's sitting on a better legal claim, perhaps. What about this physical threat to his person? Will that be enough to lure him into war?
Not my interest.
Take down these words. Addressed to King Charles of France. This assassin you send can be taken as nothing other than an infant act of war. If it be war you seek, send the full weight of your army. For a lone, cowardly assassin will not topple this King Henry V of England you so underestimate.
Henry never writes to France about the assassination attempt because that's believed to be wrapped up in the Southampton affair, which is a domestic issue. But we do know that Henry writes to Charles VI, the King of France at this point, before his invasion, and essentially he offers Charles the chance to hand over the crown of France without any bloodshed, without any fighting or anything like that. And he kind of says in this letter, you know, this is the last chance for you to do the right thing, to recognise my superior claim and hand over the crown before I'm forced to come to war with you. When he writes to Charles VI, he is trying to mitigate the chance of war. He's trying to give Charles the chance to avoid it. Obviously, Charles is never going to say, okay, fine, here's the crown of France, let's not fight about it. But Henry is then able to say, look, I've done everything that I could to avoid going to war, when actually it's all he really wants to do.
As of this day, we are at war with France. I would ask you to deliver this message to France, given your familiarity with its recipient. But I believe in the morning you be otherwise engaged.
Pray how, my liege?
Tomorrow you will have your heads cut off.
But interesting that we get Cambridge and Grey now being wrapped up in what will be the Southampton affair. So they were, in real life, the exposed as the prime movers behind it. And in fact, Cambridge would try to make the point that he was the only real mastermind behind it, and he would try to get the others that were implicated off. And Cambridge and Grey were beheaded as part of the Southampton plot.
I will not jump to your attention. Surely not to retread vile ground I vowed never to walk again.
I acknowledge my neglect of you, John.
Interesting, we've got Falstaff back now with Henry sort of reunited.
I'm here because you are my friend.
A king has no friends. A king has only followers and foe.
When people talk about the friends of medieval kings, it's hard to understand what a medieval king would mean by a friend. Those people tended to be there because they were noblemen or political allies, or they were necessary, or they gave good advice. But does any of that come close to having a friend? Can a king still have people he just considers friends, who aren't advisors, who aren't great men of power, who are asking something of him? And I guess if Falstaff is making that point at the same time that Henry is asking Falstaff to be that friend to him.
Together, we will bring France down. Together, we will bring her to her knees. Captains all, to this end, I wish to introduce to you a new marshal of our campaign, Sir John Falstaff. But I have tasked Sir John to join this campaign for one most vital reason alone. He respects war as only a man who has seen its most monstrous form can.
John's a great man, John's a brilliant man, John's a great guy. I don't know, he seems to be at the centre of a lot of what's going on here. Here we've got being set up what would be the Siege of Harfleur. So this was the first military action of Henry's campaign. He lands near Harfleur. He wants to take that as his base in France to set up a supply route from England so that he can maintain his armies. Although it's a bit of a pain to have to deal with a siege for a month, it's a pretty quick victory in siege terms for Henry and a really strong start to his campaign in France. Quite like the trebuchets. I'm not so sure about all of the flaming missiles that they would have used. I think it's effective here at night. It means you can see what people are firing around. But what you're really likely to be firing there are big stones. The aim is to crack the big stone walls of the city of Harfleur. And burning material has its uses if there are wooden structures inside that you want to set fire to. But you may not also want to completely burn down a city that you're hoping to get control of, because then you've got the job of rebuilding it all. The stones would really be focused on pummeling the walls. But I also think what this scene does really well is drive home that relentless grind of a siege, that these machines could be kept firing with crews of men 24 hours a day. So they would be constantly churning stones into the walls, and those within the city would be living with this constant thud, thud, thud of the threats against their livelihoods and their lives. So I think this does actually a really good job of in a fairly short time driving home that kind of long-winded grind of a siege. So we have the commander of the French town coming out to surrender, and this is how the end of a siege would most likely play out. By the rules of war, the city would be given the chance to surrender. They could request to send for help from their master, so they could ask Charles VI of France to send them military aid, and a timescale would be put on that. If at the end of that timescale the help didn't arrive, then the city would be given another chance to surrender, and they could either accept that or they could continue to hold out. And if they continue to hold out, they could expect no mercy. But if they're surrendering here under terms, they could expect to be treated well, they could expect to save their lives and perhaps be allowed to leave the city with their goods and all of that kind of thing. So there's this kind of almost gentlemanly element to siege warfare, that there are rules, and everybody knows the rules and everybody knows the risks of the actions that they take. But you could end up in these situations where you get this Very civilized sort of handover of a town at the end of a siege. Henry makes the decision after the Siege of Harfleur. There is lots of suggestion that they should take ship and go round to Calais, which the English also hold. But Henry decides to take his army across land, and no one can kind of really make sense of why he's doing this. It's a much more dangerous route. The Siege of Harfleur has left some of his army ill with dysentery, so the rampant diarrhea that is the problem encountered by lots of medieval armies. Some men have been shipped home. Some have had to be left in Harfleur as a garrison there to protect the town, so the French can't just take it back. So we do get this kind of ragtag group making its way across France, and I quite like this sort of straggly line of them meandering their way through the French countryside.
We are both outnumbered and outpositioned. They have the downslope in their favour. Our need to advance puts us already at disadvantage.
The longer we wait, the larger their force will grow, and with it our disadvantage.
These are absolutely the things that were playing into people's minds on the eve of Agincourt, how they're going to defeat what looks like a superior army.
The ground out there is a flood bowl, already half sodden. When it rains tonight, as I know it will, that ground will turn into a muddy bog. And with their horses and their armour, they will get stuck. They will fall.
As shall we.
Not if we travel light, without horses and without armour. Speed and mobility will be our advantage.
That is a tactic they used at Agincourt. They did fight dismounted. But it wasn't a new tactic, and I'm not sure that the noblemen around would have been having their minds blown by this incredible general. Falstaff, who knows all of war, has come up with this brand new tactic that we can use. They've been doing this for years.
If it rains tonight, we fight tomorrow.
Oui, le Dauphin!
Je vous remercie de me recevoir, Votre Majesté.
Please speak English. I enjoy to speak English.
Okay, there is no way the Dauphin would want to talk to the King of England in English. He would expect the King of England to be speaking French to him. And the idea that he would be sitting when a king walks in the room, that would be considered really, really insulting to Henry. The Dauphin is just a prince. Henry is a king. But also this meeting didn't happen. The Dauphin was not at Agincourt. He stayed with his father away from the army. Charles VI suffered from bouts of serious mental illness and was often incapable of ruling. And so his son took on lots of the responsibility, but chose not to go to Agincourt.
I have not come to surrender. But too much Christian blood will be spilled on this field today. So I propose this. You and I fight one man on one man. We fight in our army's stead.
So this idea of a duel is coming back again. We saw this at Shrewsbury where it didn't happen, but it's clearly Henry's desire to avoid this widespread bloodshed by fighting duels one-on-one, having a strong belief in his own abilities. Interestingly, he does offer one-on-one combat to the Dauphin while he's in France. While they're marching towards what will become the battlefield at Agincourt, he's being trailed by a French army, and he does send letters to the Dauphin saying, do you know what? We don't need all of these people to fight. Why don't you and me have a duel? And the Dauphin sort of doesn't explicitly reject it, but never accepts the offer. He finds excuses to get out of having a duel with Henry. And in France, this was considered slightly dishonourable. So they were concerned that their prince, their future king, was rejecting the idea of a chivalric duel against the King of England, because the suggestion is obviously that he feared he would lose, that the King of England was the better warrior.
What say you?
Are you scared of this battle? There's no shame of it. You came here. To me! Surrender to me!
I cannot do that.
That could have had a huge impact on both armies. So Henry does offer single combat to the Dauphin. The Dauphin rejects it, which damages the morale of the French people and enhances the morale of the English, who now think the French are scared of them. So whether Henry ever envisaged the Dauphin accepting and actually having a one-on-one duel with him is hard to know, but there is a psychological element to even making the offer and hoping that it will be refused.
Let us make famous that field out there. This little village of Agincourt.
With a heavy dose of hindsight there.
You expected me a speech? I've only one to give.
So pre-battle speeches seem to have happened a fair bit. They're often reported in chronicles. How accurate they are, we don't know. Do they apply a bit of hindsight and polish to the pre-battle speeches that were given? But it does seem that these moments were viewed as a last moment to remind people why they're there, what they're fighting for, and why it's important that you win this battle, and quite often warn people that, you know, your families will suffer if we can't defend this land.
I've only ever hoped for one thing. To see this kingdom united under this English crown. All men are born to die, we know it. We carry it with us always. If your day be today, so be it. Mine.
Thanks, Henry. If you're going to die today, so be it.
Mine will be tomorrow. Or mine today and yours tomorrow, it matters not.
Matters not. It matters to some people, surely.
Make it England! Make it England!
Just isn't the most inspiring pre-battle speech. You think what Shakespeare gave us with the band of brothers, we lucky few, on St. Crispin's Day, that, you know, all of that is really rousing.
We few, we happy few, we band of brothers.
I find that really lacking from this moment, which is a real shame, because having drawn so heavily on Shakespeare's version of history, they then bin one of Shakespeare's greatest speeches in one of the greatest moments in a Shakespeare play and replace it with something that kind of doesn't do the job.
For the King and St. George!
So they've given us an interesting representation of Agincourt here, the field, in the sense that the narrow strip between two bits of wood is accurate. Henry deliberately chose this place for the battle to take place because those areas of woods reduce the front that is available to the French cavalry. So this idea that we're familiar with from things like 300 and the hot gates and stuff like that, that you funnel the enemy and you reduce the advantage of their numbers, was absolutely in play at Agincourt. They've given us a green field. We know that the field was a freshly ploughed one, so this would likely have been a brown, muddy field rather than the green, grassy field that we've got there. And I guess although this isn't the tactics at Agincourt, I quite like the idea that they've gone for the slow march forward. Lots of these films would be tempted to go for people running at full pelt, sprinting across the battlefield, and you simply wouldn't do that. You wouldn't expend all of that energy before you even got to the fight. So I quite like the slow plod forward, even though this isn't what was happening at Agincourt at this time. Traditionally, armies would understand that the one that moves first is most likely to lose the battle. The key is to pick a good piece of ground and to stay there. And so part of the problem you've got then is how you lure or taunt the enemy into moving off their position and making the attack. So I do quite like they're bringing in the archers now. So this is a key part of what happens at Agincourt. The majority of the army that are there on the English side are archers, and so it's them raining down arrows that really drive the French to attack. The French are still, arguing over who's going to attack first. They all want the glory of leading the first charge because they think the English will be so easy to defeat that this will be over quickly. and those leading the vanguard will get all of the glory of defeating a king of England on French soil. So the disarray in the French army really plays into the English hands at this point, and leads them to want to charge. You know, they don't need much of an excuse to be charging headlong into battle, and the archery fire is what will ultimately drive them to do that. What's the only face we can see in this entire film at the moment? It's John. But we do have Hal sort of hiding in the woods, and there's no sense that he's doing that at all. He uses the woods to funnel the French, but he's not using it particularly as cover. Henry is actually with the vanguard of his own men. He is right at the centre of the fighting throughout, and at one point is so close to the enemy that, you know, he's wearing a crown on his helmet, and a piece of it is chipped off because he's so close to the enemy. So I think they're getting more and more wrong here. The Dauphin's not there. Henry is not hiding in the woods. Okay, so they've gone for the knock, draw, loose, which would be the calls we would expect. So you knock the arrow, you draw the bow, and you loose the arrow. The one thing that they do a lot in films like this is that they hold on the draw, and medieval archers would not be keen to do that. These war bows are incredibly hard work to pull.
On me!
He's obviously decided he does want a duel with Henry now because he's fickle and he can't decide what he wants. I love the idea that the battle is frozen while everyone watches these couple do their Saturday night fever in the middle of Agincourt battlefield. It's just not going to happen, is it? I think it's funny to watch him slip and slide around in the mud. I think for me this is driving home that idea that the French were so overconfident, didn't deal with the terrain, didn't deal with the enemy that was in front of them, and were so convinced of their own power and prowess that thought they would win this battle no matter what they did, no matter how badly they performed. And I think the Dauphin is kind of being used to represent that slipping and sliding around in the mud. He's doing what the entire French army did on that day. And I feel like the idea that Henry would order a pylon of his men-at-arms onto a French prince doesn't feel right to me. Surely if anyone is going to finish off a Prince of France, it would be Henry, the King of England. But also, the Dauphin doesn't die at Agincourt because the Dauphin isn't at Agincourt. This particular Dauphin actually does die a few years later, and it's his younger brother Charles who will become the Dauphin and will eventually challenge for the crown of France against Henry. And maybe this is a way to get this character out of the way, much as he did earlier with Thomas, but this just doesn't happen and doesn't particularly make sense to me. It's funny, but it's a weird way to end the Battle of Agincourt. Oh no, guess who Henry's found? He's found the hero of Agincourt, the man behind the plan, John Falstaff. Yeah, he's dead. What will England do? Oh, and I think at this point we've spent an hour and 50 minutes waiting for some emotion from Henry, and the only time we get it is a bit of a blub and a slight sniffle because John Falstaff is dead. It's the only thing that drives Henry into a little bit of emotion. It's such a frustrating flaw in the film, almost like the guy who plays John Falstaff co-wrote the film and wrote himself a pretty good part in history.
Votre Majesté, le roi Henri d'Angleterre.
Your Majesty.
So we're being introduced here to King Charles VI of France. He has been on the throne of France. By the time this meeting will be set, he's been King of France for 40 years.
I like to have the sun on my skin, but not too much. Too much is very dangerous.
He suffered from severe mental illness. He frequently believes he's made of glass, and if anyone touches him, he will shatter. He has killed close members of his court in fear that they might break him if they touch him. So he's been quite a problematic ruler for France. And part of the reason, I think, why France was wide open to something like Henry's Agincourt campaign.
I have, of course, traveled here to offer you my surrender.
Did you ask anything of me in return?
No. I do, however, have for you a proposition. You take the hand of my daughter, Catherine, in marriage.
This will be taking place in 1420, so this meeting will reference the Treaty of Troyes, which is an agreement that takes place 5 years after Agincourt between Charles and Henry, in which Charles effectively decides to appoint Henry as his heir. So he disinherits his own remaining son on the condition that Henry marries Charles' daughter, Catherine of Valois. So that there is some continuity of Charles' line in there. But I think by 1420, this happens almost immediately after the Battle of Agincourt, but it was 5 years later. Henry has done much more campaigning in France, and Charles has reached the point of realization, I think, that he can't beat Henry and that Henry is on the verge of simply taking France. So this is a way for Charles to prevent himself from being dethroned.
You have proven yourself to be a most worthy king. I would say you have proven yourself to be one of England's great kings.
A big dose of hindsight there from Gascoigne. Henry, will go on to be remembered as a great king of the medieval period. His reputation is difficult, it's slightly problematic, it's wrapped up in several moments in which he's accused of war crimes and things like that, and we wouldn't necessarily recognise a ruler who invades a foreign land as being a particularly good ruler today. But clearly he's playing into the story here that Henry is the victor of Agincourt, that he's done so much. And I think one of the things with Henry's reputation is that he dies at the height of his power. So Henry dies not too long after the Treaty of Troyes. He's heir to the throne of France. He's married to a French princess. He's had pretty much solid victory for almost a decade in France. And he dies before the wheels can come off. So Henry is going to visit his new wife, and she's surrounded by her ladies. This seems really accurate, all wearing headdresses. You would cover your head if you weren't a single lady, single and looking to mingle. There is this sense at the beginning of their marriage of, I don't even know you.
I will not submit to you. You must earn my respect.
I understand that.
Do you?
So Catherine has her own fascinating story that it's hard to do justice to in a film like this, but I quite like this representation of her as a little bit kind of no-nonsense. She's not the kind of giggling girl who's in the corner doing her weaving or whatever else.
Why did you bring war to France?
Your father came on spoiling.
Oh, so? How was he spoiling?
He sent an assassin.
There was no assassin. There was no plot to kill you.
we're being given a Henry who doesn't want the war. So it's not that he's been looking for an excuse to do it. He's been driven to it by what he thinks has happened. And if you strip all of that away, you remove that assassination plot in particular, what's he gone to war for? Because Henry got sent a ball.
Gentle.
Well, where did the story that had originated in France come from? It can only have come from Gascoigne. Gascoigne, the man who was desperately trying to find a way to drive Henry to war. So now Henry is feeling tricked. Deprived of Falstaff, it turns out that he was surrounded by people he couldn't trust. Don't forget Falstaff.
What lands in France have you now annexed?
I don't understand.
Please, please.
Sincerely,
stop
I do not understand.
Stop the fucking charade! Stop it!
I have given you what you wanted, boy!
You wanted peace.
Did you not?
Paris deserves peace.
So in real life, Gascoigne kind of serves as Henry's Chief Justice for the first few years of his reign, but then it's not quite clear whether he's sacked or he retires, but he dies in 1419, so he's dead by the time this scene takes place, of natural causes, I should probably point out. But again, it points to this isolation of the king in his position on the throne. Even those he felt he could trust, those closest to him, those who've given him what he wanted, he can't trust them. He is alone.
I ask nothing of you. Only that you will always speak to me clear and true. Always. Will you promise me only that?
I will.
Henry and Catherine's marriage ends up being very brief. They're married as the aftermath of the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. Henry is dead in 1422 on campaign in France. So they're married for kind of less than 2 years. She does get pregnant during that time and gives birth to a son who is 9 months old when his father dies in the wars in France. So this is clearly being set up without the benefit of hindsight as the beginning of a really long relationship, of exploring how we will work together when we don't know each other. And she actually lives a fascinating life after that. So she is believed to have engaged in an affair, or the beginnings of a relationship, with a man named Edmund Beaufort, who was the Duke of Somerset. And this led the council, the government, to be concerned about what if a young widowed queen, who is the mother of the current king, what if she remarries? What about the influence that gives a stepfather over the king? So the council put this law in place that says if the queen marries without their permission, whoever she marries will lose all of his lands and titles. So Catherine finds a way to circumvent this. She ends up in a relationship and being married to a commoner from Wales. So she marries him and he has nothing to lose. The council can't take anything from him because he doesn't have anything. They go on to have several children together. So his name is Owen Tudor. Their children are Edmund and Jasper Tudor, who are the significant two children. Edmund Tudor then has a son, Henry Tudor, who becomes King Henry VII of England. Right, well, I hope you've enjoyed taking a good look through the King with me. Maybe you agree with my assessment, maybe you don't. Let me know in the comments where you think I've got it right and where you think I've got it wrong. And you can subscribe to History Hits YouTube channel for more of the greatest content in history.